Afghanistan is reeling from devastation, and the death toll keeps climbing. A powerful 6.0 magnitude earthquake has ripped through eastern Afghanistan, turning entire villages into rubble and claiming over 1,400 lives in what has become one of the country's deadliest natural disasters in recent memory. We're talking about thousands of collapsed homes, desperate rescue operations, and communities cut off from the outside world. This isn't just another earthquake, it's a humanitarian catastrophe unfolding in real time. So what exactly happened, and why was this earthquake so deadly? To understand the full scope of this disaster, we need to examine both the geological forces at play and the tragic human cost that continues to mount.
Taliban officials say 1,400 people are now believed dead, with more than 3,000 injured. UN officials say that number is likely to rise.
We think potentially the impacted individuals could go up to almost into the hundreds of thousands.
The hardest hit area is Afghanistan's Kunar Province, a mountainous region where people...
The earthquake struck just before midnight on Sunday, September 1st, 2025, when most people were asleep in their homes. The epicenter was located in Nurgal district, Kunar Province, about 17 miles east of Jalalabad, near Afghanistan's border with Pakistan. But what made this earthquake particularly devastating wasn't just its magnitude, it was the shallow depth at which it occurred. At just 5 miles beneath the surface, this relatively moderate earthquake became a killer, amplifying ground motions and causing widespread destruction across the mountainous region. The vulnerability of Afghanistan's infrastructure played a crucial role in this disaster. The earthquake struck remote mountainous areas where people live in poorly constructed homes made of mud bricks and wood, structures that simply cannot withstand the violent shaking of even moderate earthquakes.
More than 1,000 people killed, entire villages wiped out, and it all came from a magnitude 6 earthquake. At first glance, that magnitude doesn't sound unusual. We actually see 100 to 150 earthquakes of this size every year. So why was this one so deadly? Because of where it struck, when it struck, and how people build their homes. It hit just before midnight, when most people were asleep, with an epicenter less than 10 kilometers deep. And in rural Afghanistan, homes are built with mud, brick, stone, raw timber, locally available and affordable materials. But this monolithic style isn't engineered to resist the side-to-side shaking an earthquake generates. So buildings simply crumble and bury people inside.
These communities, many of which include recent migrants who had been deported from Iran and Pakistan, were already among Afghanistan's most vulnerable populations before disaster struck.
Well, in another recent devastating earthquake, which took place in 2023, women were disproportionately counted among the dead and injured for a variety of reasons, but one of them is because of the restrictions in place on women under the Taliban's gender apartheid system. You simply have more women and girls who are at home. They're, within the four walls of their homes, and often the homes collapsed. And the other reason is, again, because of the restrictions, that's driven a lot of men to leave the country and work abroad, primarily in Iran. That earthquake took place in Areet, the province that neighbors Iran. And so a lot of men were away working, and there was no one around to, try to get the women outside and to support them. And then you have the restrictions on women healthcare workers and women aid workers who are needed to actually support the women injured and who need medical assistance from the earthquake. So these are just some of the ways in which the discriminatory policies make it so much worse for women and girls. And we're certainly going to see more earthquakes in the future. And this is going to continue unless those underlying policies are addressed.
The geological reality of Afghanistan makes earthquakes like this almost inevitable. The country sits at the intersection of the Indian and Eurasian tectonic plates, creating a complex network of fault lines beneath the Hindu Kush mountain range. This tectonic activity has generated at least 71 earthquakes of magnitude 6.0 or larger within 250 kilometers of Sunday's quake since 1950, including 6 magnitude 7.0 or larger events. Afghanistan isn't just earthquake-prone, it's sitting on one of the most seismically active regions in the world. But Sunday's earthquake was particularly destructive due to several factors that created a perfect storm of devastation. The shallow depth of 5 miles meant that seismic waves had less distance to travel before reaching the surface, maintaining their destructive power. Heavy rains in the days before the earthquake had already weakened building foundations and made the ground more susceptible to landslides. The soft sediments beneath the epicentral area significantly amplified ground motions, turning what might have been a manageable earthquake into a catastrophe. Rescue operations began immediately, but the remote mountainous terrain has made reaching survivors extremely challenging. Roads connecting Kunar Province to the outside world have been blocked by landslides caused by the earthquake, aftershocks, and continuing heavy rains. Military helicopters have become the primary means of evacuating the wounded, with 40 flights carrying 420 injured and dead people in the first days after the disaster.
Afghanistan is facing one of the worst humanitarian crises on the planet before this earthquake took place. In just the last 6 months, we have seen nearly 2 million Afghans being returned from Pakistan and from Iran, already putting pressure on an overly stretched humanitarian system. And when we've seen the types of suspensions and cuts to funding as we have in the last year, it means that that system cannot absorb any more shocks.
Taliban forces deployed 200 soldiers to assist in rescue operations, while 30 ambulances worked around the clock to transport survivors. The human cost extends far beyond the immediate casualties. The United Nations estimates that at least 84,000 people have been directly or indirectly affected by the earthquake, with many more displaced from their destroyed homes. In a region already facing food insecurity after 4 consecutive years of drought, this disaster has pushed vulnerable communities to the brink of survival. The World Vision Aid Agency warns that more than 250,000 people could soon need help accessing basic needs and services if adequate resources aren't made available.
We are in Khas Kunar, just few mountains away from the epicenter of the earthquake in Mazardara. Mazardara is a valley, and this valley has several villages. These villages were inflicted by the earthquake. Now, the official number of people who are killed is around 2,200, and there are around 4,000 people injured. But there are a lot of concern that many people are still on the rubble, and there is a kind of very difficult possibility to reach there. It's a very mountainous area. Even a helicopter cannot land there. Rescue teams are finding it very difficult to reach that area. There's no internet, no telephones, no SIM cards working. Even we are suffering from this issue. We're trying our best to get there. According to journalists here and other observers, it is very difficult to go there by a car even. So we might get there by a car close to there, then we'll have to walk for around 2 or 3 hours, along with the rescue teams who are trying to reach the villages. So there are still hundreds of people on the rubble, and they're feared to be dead. However, there's no possibility to do anything right now with this difficult geography here in the area. Ali Hashim, Al Jazeera, Kunar, Afghanistan.
Aftershocks have continued to terrorize the region, with at least 17 recorded tremors, including 3 measuring magnitude 5.2. On September 2nd, a significant aftershock caused additional damage and injuries while triggering more landslides that blocked rescue routes and slowed relief efforts. These continuing tremors serve as a constant reminder that the earth beneath Afghanistan remains unstable and dangerous. The international response has been swift, but faces significant challenges. The United Nations immediately allocated $5 million in emergency assistance and deployed aid teams to affected areas. The European Union pledged $130 tons of emergency supplies and €1 million in aid. Iran's foreign minister offered humanitarian assistance, beginning with 80 tons of flour and cooking oil delivered to Kunar Province. However, relief efforts face enormous obstacles due to funding cuts that had already closed 44 medical clinics in the region and suspended crucial humanitarian air services. This earthquake strikes Afghanistan at one of its most vulnerable moments in recent history. The country, already one of the world's poorest, has been struggling with the economic and social consequences of decades of conflict, including a 20-year war with the United States. Since the Taliban's return to power, Afghanistan has faced international isolation that has complicated humanitarian efforts and economic recovery. The influx of over 2.3 million Afghan migrants returned from Iran and Pakistan this year had already strained resources before this natural disaster struck.
All right, the UN's refugee chief has urged Pakistan to temporarily halt its large-scale expulsion of Afghan refugees.
This is following a powerful earthquake in eastern Afghanistan that has left nearly 1,500 people dead and more than 3,700 injured. Officials say thousands of registered Afghan refugees have crossed back over the border from Pakistan in recent days, with the pace of returns rising sharply despite the deadly earthquake that struck Afghanistan over the weekend.
UN High Commissioner for Refugees Filippo Grandi has appealed to Pakistan to pause the implementation of its illegal foreigners repatriation plan. He also noted that the recent earthquake has affected over 500,000 people, emphasizing that continued aid from donors, including Pakistan, remains vital.
The tragedy is compounded by Afghanistan's recent history with devastating earthquakes. In June 2022, a 5.9 magnitude earthquake killed around 1,000 people in eastern Afghanistan. Just last year, three 6.3 magnitude earthquakes struck western Afghanistan's Areet province, with the Taliban claiming 4,000 deaths, while the United Nations estimated 1,500 fatalities. This pattern of recurring seismic disasters highlights Afghanistan's ongoing vulnerability and the inadequate building standards that turn natural hazards into humanitarian catastrophes. Medical organizations have mobilized to provide emergency care in the affected regions. Save the Children sent medical teams to Kunar Province, while Médecins Sans Frontières deployed teams to hospitals in neighboring Nangarhar and Laghman provinces. However, the scale of medical needs far exceeds local capacity, with many injured people requiring evacuation to better-equipped facilities in Jalalabad and other cities. The earthquake's impact extends beyond Afghanistan's borders, with tremors felt across neighboring Pakistan and as far away as Delhi, India. In Pakistan's Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Punjab province, says the shaking served as a stark reminder of the region's shared seismic vulnerability. The disaster has also prompted calls for Pakistan to suspend its ongoing deportation of Afghan migrants, recognizing that many of those affected by the earthquake were among the vulnerable populations recently forced to return to Afghanistan. Looking ahead, the challenges facing earthquake survivors are immense. With winter approaching and thousands of families now homeless, the need for emergency shelter, food, and medical care will only intensify. The destruction of roads and infrastructure has created isolated pockets of survivors who may not receive assistance for days or weeks. Children who have lost parents, families separated in the chaos, and communities where entire extended families have been wiped out face a long and difficult recovery process. The broader implications of this disaster extend to Afghanistan's already fragile social fabric. In a country where communities rely heavily on traditional support networks, the loss of hundreds of families in small villages creates ripple effects that will be felt for generations. The psychological trauma of survivors, particularly children who witnessed the destruction of their communities, will require long-term support that Afghanistan's limited mental health resources cannot adequately provide. This earthquake also highlights the urgent need for improved building standards and disaster preparedness in Afghanistan. While the country's political and economic situation makes major infrastructure improvements challenging, even basic improvements in construction techniques could save thousands of lives in future earthquakes. The international community's response to this disaster could provide an opportunity to not just address immediate needs, but also invest in long-term resilience building. The rescue operations continue as teams race against time to find survivors trapped beneath collapsed buildings. Every hour that passes reduces the chances of finding people alive, making the blocked roads and difficult terrain even more tragic. Local communities have shown remarkable resilience, with neighbors digging through rubble with their bare hands and sharing limited resources with displaced families. As Afghanistan grapples with this latest tragedy, the earthquake serves as a sobering reminder of how natural disasters can devastate already vulnerable populations. The combination of geological instability, poor construction standards, economic hardship, and political isolation has created conditions where a moderate earthquake becomes a humanitarian catastrophe. The international community's response in the coming weeks and months will determine whether this disaster becomes a catalyst for improved disaster preparedness or simply another tragic chapter in Afghanistan's long history of suffering. The story of Afghanistan's earthquake is still unfolding, with rescue operations ongoing and the full extent of the damage still being assessed. What's clear is that this disaster will have lasting impacts on a country already facing enormous challenges. The courage of rescue workers, the generosity of international donors, and the resilience of Afghan communities offer hope amid the devastation. But rebuilding will require sustained commitment and resources that extend far beyond the immediate emergency response. For the families who have lost loved ones, the communities that have been destroyed, and the survivors who must somehow rebuild their lives, this earthquake represents both an ending and a beginning. The question now is whether the international community will provide the support needed to ensure that Afghanistan can build back better and stronger, reducing the vulnerability that made this natural disaster so deadly. Then, ko az for watching, and if you want to stay updated on natural disasters and their impacts on vulnerable communities around the world, be sure to subscribe for more in-depth coverage of these critical global events.